Fran Bridge. I was reading the comments on a recent post over on Mike Rinder's blog, L. Ron Hubbard, Messiah or Hypnotic Operator. There was an interesting discussion about how sympathy and empathy are seen in Scientology, and how that differs from the world outside. I'd be interested in your take on that and how it impacts relationships between Scientologists. I believe that people form deep bonds when they are immersed in a dangerous or destructive environment. I'm sure that's true in Scientology, but I wonder if this control and change of the language impacts that. Thanks, Fran. And yeah, the language and thought reform that occurs in Scientology, the change of people's minds using language, is especially evident when it comes to sympathy and empathy in the world of Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard very specifically states that giving sympathy to someone is the least effective thing you can do in order to help them when they are in some sort of a situation. And instead, what you should be doing is applying Scientology directly to them, either by auditing them or by somehow, giving them a Scientology assist, or by teaching them some Scientology, or getting them to read a book or something like that, whatever would be most applicable to the circumstances. Obviously, some guy's bleeding out on the road, you're going to treat the bleeding. I mean, let's not take this to, ridiculous extremes. But here we're talking about when somebody is depressed, anxious, angry, upset, is in some kind of life, trauma or problem or situation where they are concerned or worried about something. Instead of sympathizing with that person, and this also applies, by the way, to grief-stricken people who have suffered a loss of some kind or had some devastating trauma, and they've as of course have now don't have a husband or a wife or a kid or something like that. Hubbard said that just consoling them or sympathizing with them or trying to empathize with them, only if you can't do anything else, because basically that's not really helping the person. Hubbard said that sympathy and empathy come from simpatico, right? Like you're trying to relate to this person's emotional state by showing you also are in a down emotional state, or you're, empathizing with them by speaking softly, consolingly, maybe patting them on the back or the shoulder, or somehow making physical contact to try to ease the pain of the loss that they're experiencing, let's say with a grief-stricken person. And he said that's all nice, but it doesn't address the cause of the problem. And Hubbard was all about finding the causes of the problem and addressing that, and thereby making the problem go away. And that approach is the problem with Scientology, because some things are not a problem that have a source that you need to isolate and deal with and make it go away, and then the person won't feel that way anymore. That's not how life works with things like loss or grief or trauma. Something happened, and you can't undo what happened. You can't change it. You can't modify it even. You can't do anything about it. You have to deal with that. And to say that a person is grieving because they lost their father, but really the true source of the grief is because they lost their uncle when they were 5, and actually the true source of the grief from that is because they lost their Uncle Iggy 20,000 million years ago, and that's the source of the problem of the grief. And if we could just address that traumatic incident 23,000 million years ago, then you'll feel better about your Uncle Mike dying now. I mean, that's stupid. That's not how it works. But that's how Scientologists believe it works, right? That's how I believed it works, is that every single emotion you experience or problem you have or trauma or stress you're experiencing has some kind of source in part of your mind. Your reactive mind is how Hubbard calls it, that simply needs to be extricated, like surgically removed. And if you do that, you'll no longer feel bad. Well, that's, there's nothing in Scientology about effectively dealing with the loss of someone, or the grief you experience, or the other emotions I described, right? I've been kind of harping on this grief thing, but it also applies to other situations where there are what Hubbard calls misemotion, right? Negative emotions, grief, anger, guilt, apathy, sorrow, these kinds of things. So the whole thrust of what Scientologists are indoctrinated in is that that's how you're supposed to deal with those things. You're not supposed to console people or empathize with them. And that's really kind of has a lot of different consequences within the world of Scientology. And the higher you get in Scientology as far as your commitment to it, the more your life is going to be ruled by this kind of thinking. Sea Org members, for example, are known for being extremely unsympathetic. They could care less, right? When I was a Sea Org member, I was like, nose to the grindstone. I was like moving on my mission, and there was just, nothing really was going to get in the way of that. So if somebody was, upset or had some issue or problem, to me that was like a petty foible. It was like okay, whatever, it's like let's move on. When it comes to death and dying, for example, Scientologists could care less, really, because, I should say, individual Scientologists will have to experience the stages of grief or upset or have to go through that process, but the attitude of the group, okay, is that loss doesn't really matter that much because we're all immortal spiritual beings and he's just going off to get another body, or she, or whoever it was who passed on, right? Not a big deal, right? The whole indoctrination is that this life and the things you own, and including your body, not that important. Really not a big deal. And maybe that might be, a not so horrible perspective to have in the bigger picture sometimes. But on the other hand, I value my body. I value my things, right? And when I was in Scientology, I didn't. That's why I don't have a lot of keepsakes and mementos and possessions from from early in my life, or from when I was in Scientology and in the Sea Org. I didn't keep stuff, right? Because it was just not very important. And of course, now that I've left, my attitudes about that have changed. And I am not saying that that it's healthy to want things and not healthy to not want things. What I'm trying to make the point about here is that it should be your decision. And it should be up to you how you want to address and deal with the problems and bumps in the road of life, right? And you shouldn't be told those things don't matter when to you they do. And you shouldn't be told that those things are unimportant when they are important to you and they do matter to you, right? That's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is it's kind of everybody has to deal with it their own way. And in Scientology, it's an enforced thing that your problems and issues are not important. Just the only thing that really matters is Scientology.